Yes, good evening, hello, and welcome everyone to this very first episode and session of the Feminist Climate Academy, which today is all about the gender phase of the climate crisis. Might I just say, isn't it lovely to see a packed room like this one? I always think when there are many people attending, it sort of underlines the importance of what we're gathering for together. So I would say a big thank you to each and everyone here with us in Amsterdam at Pakhuis de Zwijger, but also to our online audience. We see you, you're with us. We appreciate you for being here, so thank you so much for tuning in. Now, my name is Hajia Goubi. I'm a former United Nations Youth Representative from the Netherlands, a next-gen speaker, co-founder of Network 2100, but above all, I am very delighted to be your moderator for today. And now, before we start, I just mentioned the full room. We have people online, but I'm very curious actually to know which people in the room here with us, and if you're watching online, please let us know in the chat, which of you are tuning in and are present here today because you're part of the Feminist Climate Academy. Can I see some hands in the room? Okay. I see that the group of people they went and sat in the back, they're watching each and every one of you. They're like, okay, we're going to keep a good eye on you. But that's so lovely to see. Now, to those of you that aren't too familiar with the Feminist Climate Academy, I will tell you about it. It's an initiative by ActionAid, an international women's rights organization that really advocates for an equitable and sustainable world by working together, you know, with women's movements and really local communities worldwide to ensure that. Now, the Feminist Climate Academy is a series of 7 sessions in which young people learn about activism. They really learn about making impact on specific topics, lobbying specifically on this topic of climate and gender and how we can bring that more together to really get feminist solutions on the table for the climate crisis that we're dealing with. Now, 4 of those sessions are organized and hosted here by Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam. And this is the very first one. But I'm very happy to see that we have a nice mixture of people that are part of the Academy and others that are attending this session, because these sessions at Pakhuis are open to everyone. So hopefully we can get some diverse perspectives in because of that. Now, a full house today, as I've mentioned a couple of times, but there are also still some spots open for the next session. So if you really like what we're doing today and you're like, I want to be there again, or a friend of yours that does, or somebody that's not a friend but that should really wrap their minds around feminism and the climate crisis, then please bring them in. We welcome everyone. So that would be super lovely. Now, you've been seated here for a little bit now, but I actually also want to give each and every one of you the opportunity to get to know each other. Perhaps you know some people, perhaps you came here with some people, but if you don't, then there is one big denominator amongst each and every one of us. We all took the time out of our busy daily schedules to sit here and come together for something very important. And I actually would, I would like to ask you for the next couple of minutes if you can just look around in the room and try to see and catch somebody that you don't know yet, to speak with them for a bit, and we will help you along, because it would be super great if you could talk to somebody about an example of the link between gender and the climate crisis, and just see if you can come up with examples amongst each other. Is there something that personally really resonates you when making that interlinkage? I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll get back together in a bit. So please go ahead and make some friends, I would say. Het is altijd heel makkelijk als je naast iemand... Ja, als jullie willen, doe het vooral. Doe dat, dat is wel leuk. Ga maar, ja. Ja, dan vraag ik jullie ook zo aan tafel wat te zeggen. Oké, strijders. Mensen zijn uiteen voor een paar minuten. Examples, and then it's a perfect introduction of what's going to happen. We're going to have virtual into the question. Zoom, dat we daar gaan. Maar goed, je hebt ook Zoom zonder... I wreaked havoc. I think I wreaked havoc with this question. Oh no, you're not gonna be quiet anymore today, I think. I am joking. I don't know if you're laughing because of me or if your neighbor just said a very good joke. Oh no, it's your neighbor. I wish it was me. Well, I'm very happy to see that you were all in very feisty, passionate conversations. And I'm not standing for no reason, because I'm actually quite curious to hear some of the examples that you could come up with, making the linkage between gender and the climate crisis. To our online audience, I'm sorry, I will step out of the scene for a bit, but maybe you'll be able to see me. And if not, I promise I'll be back. But I'm actually curious. This is the detrimental moment that I'm coming with my microphone to you, and everyone avoids eye contact to not get the microphone under your nose. But if you do it a bit too much, then I'm sorry. I can't help but ask, what is the example that you discussed?
We didn't discuss a specific example, but just talking about how women are very vulnerable in general, and that the climate crisis just enhances problems that are already being faced in many parts of the world, and that women have to carry a lot of that weight on their shoulders already, raising kids and maybe also working on the side. And then if more pressure is put on them through climate change, then they're suffering the hardest.
Absolutely. It's already like the burden that a lot of them already carry. It's just being exacerbated in that sense. Okay, thank you for sharing. I think that's a very good one. Is there anybody that thinks, well, we had an example that is actually very striking, or I think it will resonate with the rest of the group, that they'd like to share? Yeah, I see a hand going up. Thank you. I always appreciate it. Going to the back. Yeah.
Yes. So yesterday I actually read that the earthquake in Afghanistan mostly struck women and children because they were at home while the men were out working, and that is how this gender roles still mostly work there. So one of the examples of how a disaster then strikes people disproportionately. Yeah.
That's a very striking example as well, indeed. But it just shows and the urgency of it and how it's happening all around us with some of the major shifts that are happening. Thank you so much. I hope it was very fruitful for you to also have a moment to just talk with each other about that. Now I will swap this microphone for this one, which doesn't do much for you guys, but for me it does. Actually. I want to go on because we're going to have a bigger discussion about that, right? About this interlinkage between the climate crisis and gender, really about the gender phase of the climate crisis. And to do that, we are joined by an incredible lineup of speakers for today. So I am very honored and very happy to be joined today by Gabriela Franco Prieto, who is joining us online. She is the founder of La Totema, a Colombian ecofeminist, and she is a member of Pacto por el Clima. So Gabriela will be with us in a little bit online. We'll also be joined online by Kati Gatundu, who's a freelance consultant, and she's also the founder and director of Cavian Healthy Foods. She'll also be joining us online, so we'll see her in a bit. Unfortunately, we would have been joined today by Filsan Osman, but unfortunately, due to personal circumstances, she couldn't be here with us, which is very unfortunate because she is incredible. She's a writer, she's an intersectional climate activist, a community builder, and she would have been she has amazing insights and is so eloquent in really describing how we can decolonialize, the entire narrative around the climate crisis and how we can have a more intersectional perspective towards it. So that is a perspective that she could have brought in, but who knows, perhaps some other time we'll be graced with Filsan's presence. I have two people here seated with me at the table as well, starting here on my left. Anouk Reusen, you are the founder and director of 75 Inc. Very happy to have you here with us as well. And last but definitely not least, Gerson van der Elst, you're a senior policy officer on climate adaptation for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Very warm welcome to everyone. And maybe Anouk and Gerson, just now when we did the little exercise, I saw that you ventured into the audience as well, so you had your own conversations. Maybe we can start with that one, because I'm actually very curious, what were some of the examples that you discussed about the gender phase of the climate crisis, so to say? Maybe Anouk, if I can start with you.
Yes, I had a good discussion with a student of social sciences, and we talked about the gender phase in the Dutch energy transition, where we see that energy poverty is the burden of energy poverty is heavier on women than on men.
Yeah.
So that's a social sciences view on this. Theme.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah, and of course also what you work on with 75 Inc. So it would be very interesting to hear more about that in a little bit as well. Gerson, what was it that you discussed?
Honestly, we also didn't discuss a specific example. We were more talking about our collaboration between ActionAid and the ministry, but I think we ventured into a little bit of the gender relationship with raw materials and future meetings that we'll also have here in this series on the Feminist Climate Academy. So I think that was already very promising.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. Well, I think that's a promising start. Also, to the people that can't see it, can you please raise your notebook, because I think it just sets the right scene. A feminist with a to-do list. So Gerson is making the right steps, everyone, just so you know. But more about that in a bit, because of course it links to a lot of the work and the feminist foreign policy that you're working on, that you have been working on. Now, to everyone in the room, if you have, at any point, if you have a question, please just raise your hands. If there is room for the question, I will just come to you with the mic. If there's something that is being shared that really resonates with you, that you want to add to, please let us know. Or if there's something that you very much disagree with, also make sure to let us know, because I think we can only enhance the conversation if we, keep each other sharp and bringing that criticism if it is necessary. With that being said, I would actually very much like to go to Gabriella for the very first question regarding, this gender phase of the climate crisis. Gabriella, I already mentioned to you before, you're the founder of La Totema, you're a Colombian ecofeminist, and I just wanted to hear from you, why would you say is it so that it's important to emphasize really this gender lens in the climate and environmental movement that we need? If we can get Gabriella with us. I have been told before we started that there were some technical issues with the Zoom, and that the image is glitching, which I think you can see right behind me. But I do think that we should have Gabriella's audio if the video doesn't work at the very least.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting me to this space. Yeah. I love that it exists, a Feminist Climate Academy. I'm really glad to share it as well with the other participants. And so this is a really good question. I think, why does it matter to talk about feminism, to talk about gender in the context of the climate crisis? Well, because the context of the climate crisis crosses everything. It crosses social issues, environmental issues, economic issues, and gender issues as well. I believe personally that the climate crisis is a problem of care, and it does have to do with patriarchy, of course, but it also has to do with these other systems that feed patriarchy, like capitalism, like colonialism, like war and internal conflict. So there are many reasons why climate has the face of a woman, like they say. Yeah. One is that climate disproportionately affects poor people, and 80% of poor people in the world are women. Two is that climate change will lead to catastrophes that, and all sorts of effects that will lead to climate migrants. And this will be disproportionately women and children that are more vulnerable when in processes of migration to being forcibly recruited, or to being victims of sexual or other types of abuse. Another reason is that there is not equal representation in terms of who is making the decisions on environmental and climate issues. And we see this in large-scale things like the COP, that there was only last year starting to increase the amount, well, the parity in terms of participants, but we also see this on a small scale. And this, to me, in Colombia is even more worrisome because on a small scale, women in rural areas, but also in urban areas, are usually the ones, because of their gender role, to be taking care of water, to be taking care of land. And they know they have a more specialized relationship due to this role. And when these environments start to change and you see the effects of climate change, the one who knows it best is the person that has had a special relationship with it. But this person then, because of misogyny and discrimination and patriarchy, this person is not able to be represented in water councils or have the same land access or property rights in order to make of this catastrophe what they will. So that part of representation is important. And then there is also this ecofeminist saying that is that our body is our first territory. It is our first line of defense. And when our territories are contaminated, when they are victims to extractivism, when they are victims to violence, our bodies also see all of these effects in terms of health, because of the water that we are drinking or the air that we are breathing, but also in terms of emotions, in, well, physical and non-physical emotions, and this can cause a lot of anxiety. And this is differentiated by gender as well. So there are many, many faces to the climate. This is just some of them. And in my personal experience, one that maybe I can talk more about because I'm not a mother, I'm not in a rural area, is that climate and environmentalist spaces are still not safe spaces for women and girls that are participating in them. And this is something that we are actively trying to figure out in Colombia.
Yeah, and thank you so much for starters, Gabriela, for giving us such a clear perspective of it. I don't think that you've just showed the faces of the gender faces of the climate crisis. I think in each and every one of them, there is also a solution that you sort of tapped into. So, for example, the lack of representation, it's very clear. It needs more representation in those critical places of decision making. The societal sort of roles that women have, the cultural roles, how, the pressure on there is more exacerbated due to the effects of the climate crisis. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. Maybe before we go to Kathy, just turning to you very quickly, Anouk, because, I mean, Gabriela, she did mention the very elemental thing, right, about having women in decision-making places. I know that that's also what you focus a lot on in your work, being the founder of 75 Inc. Do you want to add anything to what she said about specifically this representation element that is this big part of the gender face of the climate crisis as well?
Absolutely. I think the roles of women in the climate crisis are in decision-making positions, but also in actually making it work in the workforce. And then, from whatever angle we look at the climate crisis and the solutions that we need, we see that women are underrepresented in the decision-making positions, but way overrepresented in people feeling the burden. And you can't really blame people that are not actually represented. That are represented. If there's nobody around the table that is different than them, of course they stay invisible. So that's why we need these women at the table, and that's at this point absolutely not happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I would even perhaps go as far as to say that at this point we know, even if people aren't seated at the table, I think very often the people that are seated at the table, they sort of know who's missing, right? It's not an unknown issue, so to say. So I don't know how you...
It's not an unknown issue, but it's not necessarily in the benefit of the people that are around the table to have to be represented. So I think it's also a matter of...
of interest, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I think so. Thank you. We'll get more into depth with that in a little bit. But for now, I would very much love to go over to Kathy if she is here with us. Because Kathy, I mean, I already mentioned you work as a freelance consultant, also for Action Aid in Kenya. So I was very curious to hear from you why you think it is so important that we have a gender perspective on the climate crisis.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yes. I don't work for ActionAid now. I used to work for ActionAid International Secretariat, based in Nairobi, looking at the issues of land, natural resources, and the whole gamut of agriculture sector. Well, when we look at the way women relate to nature, the way women relate to natural resources, and how I think Gabriel has already mentioned the question of extractivism, and it's extractivism of both natural resources and the women's bodies, whether you're talking about their energy, you're talking about their time and their flexibility, their capacity and their ability to make choices. Then I think the one that really magnifies this lack of choices for women is the agriculture sector, which is where I am coming from. So you will find that most labor that is on the agriculture sector is provided by women. That one is known, and it's already documented by organizations like FAO and IPBS. But how much control women have over that labor is a big question. And we know that agriculture sector is both a victim of climate crisis and also a great contributor to the climate crisis. So what happens is that the women who are mostly engaged in this sector, they have very little choices on what they ought to, what decisions they need to make to make the sector better, to make their own lives better. So they find themselves at a serious disadvantage when it comes to catastrophe. When catastrophe strikes, they don't even have the options of responding to the crisis. They are kind of stuck. And I think these are some of the things that we need to nuance, even when we are talking about being present at the table, the decision-making table. We always have to remember that we are talking about a power play. The reason why they are not present is because they carry so much power, and everybody knows that they carry that much power. And that's why in many countries, particularly in Latin America, I think that is where we see this most, where there's suppression of self-organization, of movements, of human rights defenders, of environmental defenders. There's such serious suppression because the power of that mobilization is known, but no one wants to be countered by that power. So I think the way these dynamics manifest is very clear, that it always works against women, and we know who are the drivers, and what drives them, of course, is the bottom line, the benefits that they get, the profits that they make. But then the challenges becomes very difficult because the spaces are not there for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're very quickly already, I think, tapping into the very core of this, right? Power dynamics and the suppression of voices, because we know that they would have an impact, and we know that they carry weight with them in the community, and that these people, well, as you said, women working within the agricultural sector, on the one hand, a sector that is contributing a lot, but is also falling victim to it on a very big scale. I'm just curious to ask from you, Kathy. I know it's a big question, but I just would love to hear your perspective on it. How do you think we can overcome that obstacle of power dynamics suppressing the voices of women? From your perspective, what can we do to make sure that we get those women into these positions of power, to bring their voices there?
This is an ongoing struggle. And we always have to remember that the struggle is not going to end tomorrow. But for me, I think from where I am coming from, especially even when I was working with ActionAid, we have found the power in mobilizing, that women can get their own spaces. And I think Gabriel has mentioned about the safety of the space. If women can find safe spaces to even just converse with each other about the issues that are affecting them, and being able to make the demands that they need to make to either the policymakers or whoever other power players there could be, but with one voice, that is a way that would help the women counter and topple this power of suppression. So their power is in their unity. That's one thing. But the other thing is that I think we have very, very few countries where we have women as heads of state, whether we are talking prime ministers or presidents.
Absolutely.
They're very few. But even those few, if they could speak for the women so that they know what's driving the agenda, the global agenda and their own national agenda, it would change a lot of things. They might be few, but if they could speak with one voice, and specifically speaking even for that weak woman, or the woman who is not weak, basically, let me not use that word, but the woman who is most underrepresented or most suppressed, and being able to amplify that voice at all levels, that would also really help a lot. We have also seen a lot of men champions who champion the causes of women just by recognizing that while the women are championing their struggles, they're not doing that for individual benefits. In many cases, women engage a lot with the natural resources, not just for themselves. They carry that burden of care. And most of the times they would be engaging with nature for the benefit of their families, their children, their communities, their countries. So if everybody would embrace that and not feel threatened, because I think the challenge that we often find is that the power play or the power holders right now, whether they are financial power holders or political power holders, they feel threatened. If they could realize that it's not a question of competition, it's a question of the survival of everybody. We are talking about the survival of the whole planet for all of us.
And it also taps into what Gabriella mentioned, right? That she can also speak for the literal danger that people experience when they speak up about these issues in some places, and that it's really about the threat that they experience in that sense. But thank you so much, Kathy. I think you mentioned some points that we can really take along with us, right? So safe spaces, there's power in unity, as you said. It's about coming together, and it's about finding each other, because in that way you can make a stronger voice for it. But also I liked what you said about moments of critical decision-making moments, so to say. Very often we see that people are being included in almost the end stages of decision-making processes, or they're being consulted when there's not a lot of changes that can be implemented anymore. So what is the critical agenda? When are the critical decision-making moments that we should let our voices be heard to really make influence influence policies, for example, when they're being shaped. With that being said, I would love to go to you, Gersom. I already mentioned you're a senior policy officer on climate adaptation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I also hinted to your notebook, and that is not for no reason, because you are doing a lot at the ministry, right, on your foreign feminist policy. So I wanted to ask you from that perspective, can you maybe give us an insight or take us along with what is happening right now at the ministry with regards to this nexus between climate and gender?
Yeah, thank you very much, and would love to do so. Perhaps it's also good for everyone's perspective to know that myself, I'm mostly working on climate, so hopefully I'm also kind of an example of how we try to integrate gender and climate. So I'm not a gender expert, but as part of our policies, we integrate a gender lens in our climate work, and I think we have increasingly become aware of the gender phase of climate change. And also as part of that, the current government has decided to adopt a feminist foreign policy. And what does that mean? It focuses on a couple of priorities. So it's about rights of women and girls. It's about representation. It's about making sufficient resources available. And it's also about reality checks. It's also about how are things dealt with in a local context. But you may also ask, what is a feminist foreign policy in practice? And I think it's still work in progress. It's only been adopted 1.5 years, but I think there are a couple of things that we try to do different, and increasingly so. So I think you may also ask critical questions on how are we doing that and why are we not doing certain elements, and would welcome to learn also from these questions. But if you want me to, I can dive into some of the different elements.
If you have examples as well, that would be lovely to hear.
Yeah, so I need to look at my notes here a little bit, because there are a lot of different priorities we have on the feminist foreign policy. But I think one main element is that we want to put women and girls, gender equality, but also other groups that are marginalized on the agenda, and prioritize them also in diplomatic outreach conversations that at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that our ministers have, that other people have. It is also about making a gender analysis in part of all the policy and programs that we're doing. So that's also about our international cooperation policy programs in which we may implement programs on climate or on food security and water, but make sure that there has always been that gender analysis and also feedback from the ground involving local actors.
Do you have an example, perhaps? Because I'm just trying to imagine what that would then look like. So you'd have a partner country, and what would it then mean to look at your international development sort of partnership through such a gender lens? Do you make requirements if you want to work together, or what does it concretely look like?
Yeah, I think perhaps there are two examples here. I think at the one end we're supporting all kind of local women groups, for instance, in amplifying their voices, being represented, but also being at a decision table. Also, partly, I think, in designing some of our own programs at the embassy level, for instance, so that tries to include their voices also in decisions on policy priorities, etc. I think the other one is that nowadays there cannot be any international development cooperation program anymore without a gender analysis. So if we start a program on water, you would always need to include a gender perspective. And I think that was very different in the past. So I think there is some progress there, and I think there is definitely more progress that needs to be made. But so that it can also be more focusing some of our programs on programs that benefit women, for instance. When we talk about energy or about clean cooking, I think based on the gender roles that exist in certain contexts, that benefits women much more if we support those type of programs.
Yeah, but that's quite clear. Thank you also for shedding light on that. So it's really about encouraging what's already out there, enhancing it, supporting it, but also looking at, hey, what are issues that maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't put a gender lens on. What are things that we should be wary of when it comes to water? Who fetches drinking water, for example, in certain regions? How do we structure our policy around that? Do I say that correctly then?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sorry, let me think of a very concrete example.
No, it's okay. No, it really
at the policy level, this is.
But thank you so much. No, that really, it's that's definitely it helps to envision it. And you did mention indeed also, you hinted towards energy. I referred to your notebook, but now I'm going to refer to the reports that you have in front of you, Anouk. Because you have also contributed to the report, The Gender Face of the Climate Crisis, that you made for Action 8. I wanted to give you also the opportunity, but also I would really like to hear, we're talking about the climate crisis, which is an international issue, but it's also as local as we can even detect it to be. I was very curious to hear from you, how are women in the Netherlands specifically affected when it comes to climate change and the effects of it? Energy poverty, I know, is a topic that you do a lot on and that the organization does a lot on. Can you just shed some perspective for us there?
Yes, I think the consequences that we experience in the Netherlands of the climate crisis are definitely less and less severe than other parts of the world experience the effects of extreme weather now, extreme heat, extreme cold. But we are part of the causes, of course, and we're also part of the solution. So I think we can look at this at different scales. We've looked with this report at the causes, the consequences, but also the solutions for a gender just energy transition, but also facing the climate crisis. Because what we see is that in the causes of the climate crisis, there's definitely a very strong gender aspect that we tend to forget. But if you see why we're actually in this, you could call it a shitstorm in this situation, is that we've burned all these fossil fuels. And who've burned the fossil fuels? That is a very small part of our population. The 10% of the population is actually responsible for the majority of the fossil fuels that were burned. And this is the global north, and especially the west, that has used all these fossil fuels. And if you then look at, who's actually using all these, if we look at a gender lens to the causes, then you see that the investments, but also transportation, housing, it's very male dominated. And we still see that in the way that we deal with climate, with energy, even in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So I think if we then look at the consequences, moving to different energy systems means that we have to stop with the gas.
Yeah.
We have to, but we need to move to different energy systems. Gas is also getting more expensive, so people that earn less money actually have more trouble paying the bills.
Right.
And if we look locally, then you see that families or that live in badly insulated housing with lower incomes, with care, with kids in house, need more energy but have less money. So we see that energy poverty in the West very much has a gender face. So it's global, but it's also local.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I think it shows that it's yes, it's an issue, a big issue, the climate crisis, and also inequality in that sense with regards to gender globally. But if you look at inequality, it happens in every sort of microcosm that you can find. Even in this room, we could detect it, but within a country, worldwide, between countries. But I think that's an important one, and it's more about the inequality than it is per se about a relativity that we can find just in between countries or communities. It's everywhere because it's the root. At its root, it's about inequality then.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to say, if anybody in the meantime has a question, please do ask it. Just raise your hand, even if we're in the middle of something. We'll lock eyes, and then I'll know that I'll get my microphone to you in a little bit. So I'm doing a quick scan, but I will be as well in the meantime. Yeah, I see some of you flirting with a question in your head. Make sure to ask it in a bit. But in the meantime, when we talk about, how interlinked all these issues are, I would actually like to go to Gabriella, because I mentioned at the very beginning, she is an eco-feminist. And I would actually love to hear from you, Gabriella. Sometimes when I talk with people and they hear eco-feminist, they're like, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be an eco-feminist? So I will pass on the very confusing faces that I get when I mention it onto you to maybe if you could explain to us what your personal interpretation is with regards to being an eco-feminist, but especially how your efforts manifest into bridging the gap when it comes to gender issues, but also youth activism, the climate crisis in essence.
Thank you. This is a great question because I also get these confused faces when I talk about ecofeminism to some. So to me, just very basically, it is a movement or a set of ideas that combines the preoccupations of the feminist movement or the preoccupations of women with the preoccupations of the environmentalist movement or the preoccupations of environmentalists or land defenders. And this looks at history, and it looks at a shared experience between women and gender, in Spanish we say diversities, gender diversities, so non-binary people, trans people. It looks at the special relationship that women and nature or earth have had historically because they have been undervalued by men. Women have been put as feminine, inferior to masculine, and have been exploited for their work, their domestic work. And nature has been put inferior to men, men in relationship to civilization, and has been exploited by men through its resources, right?
Yeah.
And because of this historical relationship, we see a lot of bridges that make us woman and nature. I call it political allies, but in Spanish it's called, what I call it is, instead of political allies, is comadrazgo. Comadre is a word that basically alludes to a woman that helps you raise your children as you help her raise her children, and you have a very intimate friendship relationship that goes beyond allyship. So this is what I believe ecofeminism is powerful as well, because it puts together two incredibly powerful movements. And it tells them your preoccupations one and the same, and if you empower women, the earth and the land will be better. And if the land and the earth are better, then women will be better as well. And everybody will be better, right?
Indeed, everyone at the very
everybody.
End. But I like that. I also like how you show us that it has a common history in the sense that, so many patriarchal influences have caused injustice and that both movements are fighting towards, and then finding sort of some unity in those root causes for the creation of those movements. That's very powerful. Just a quick run of eyes through the room. Who considers themselves eco-feminists? Can I see some hands? Okay, we see some people are very convinced. Maybe now I got you. I saw where those hands were coming from. You know that I wanted to talk for you for a little bit. I'm actually curious. I saw a hand there in the back. Maybe I can go up to you. Yes, don't hide yourselves now because I did see you. Just quickly going. Your hand was raised. Yeah, it was you, right? Yeah. You were trying to get me off my game. Was it me or not? But you do consider yourself an eco-feminist. When did you sort of like decide, or was it just now when Gabriela was explaining it?
Hi, I'm from Argentina, and this is very popular in Argentina. I mean, among feminists, and I'm doing my PhD on this topic because I study care. So we were talking before, because actually she was asking me what was the relation between my research topic, that is care studies. So thank you. So yeah, I think exactly the same as her, that I think that when women get together and we defend our bodies and our territory, we're also defending the land and the world. And it's related to care work, because our women, especially in Latin America, that we do care work at home, and then they also go and work, and they come abroad and work as care workers, cleaners. And there's an eco-feminist that I really like, that her name is Yayo Herrero, that she's a Spanish one, and that she says that capitalism is giving a word to the world and to women at the same time. So that's why I consider an eco-feminist.
Thank you for sharing that also. I think that really sheds a light. Just quickly, you were able to hear all this just now, so you're very lucky. How did you regard the conversation amongst yourselves, but also how do you regard ecofeminism after having heard a little bit more about the research and Gabriela just now?
Well, I come from a migration background, so climate migration. So for me, it's always more with the displacement lens towards gender. So we had different perspectives, but somehow all coming together. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. I think that also taps into what has been shared so far, also by the speakers. It was Gabriela's first answer where she laid out indeed how all of these are linked: capitalism, the patriarchy, the climate crisis, all in essence together. Sorry, it's always, I think for the technical team, big kudos to them, because when you swap from mic to mic, it's probably a big hassle, but I see you. Thank you. That being said, when we talk about specific contexts, and we've talked about these different elements and facets, there's one that I want to go to for a last question, and that brings me back to you, Kathy, because you already mentioned the very agricultural lens that you can apply to this issue, right? But I would actually love to hear from you. How would you say that the intersection between gender justice and environmental justice really manifests itself in rural areas, in Africa specifically, from your context? But can you maybe shed some light for us how that differs when people live in rural areas specifically? I would actually be curious to hear more about that.
I want to pick it up from where I think Gabriela, or the researcher, has mentioned about the extractivism and the violence against the bodies, against nature.
Yeah.
And part of the work that the African ecofeminists are seriously engaged in is fighting against natural extractivism because of that relationship. That it's when nature itself is depleted, that violence is also meted against women, their bodies, as I had mentioned, against their labor, against their choices. So in the rural areas, we find that when nature is depleted, it not only exposes those who live in these areas to catastrophes that would be driven by climate change, but it also gives them, they suffer hunger, let me put it that way, because the nature is not able to sustain the livelihoods of those who live in the rural areas when we only focus on producing for the market or producing for financial gain or producing for business. I'll use the agriculture sector once again to say that we are seeing a huge drive, even by national governments in Africa, to increase food production in rural areas, to ensure that all land, every piece of land is used for what they call, they say that you must prove that you're putting your land to use. And the use in this sense is, what are you producing for the market? So that is what we are using to measure the use of land. For every square meter, every square foot of land, what are you producing for the market? What's the value? How are you valuing the land? We are valuing by what goes to the market, right? But what happens is that the soils, the ecosystems, the agricultural biodiversity gets so depleted that it gets into higher demand for greater artificial inputs, chemical inputs, fertilizers, or tilling with tractors, whatever it is that you may want to do to increase production. But there is no evidence, and I think FAO, much as FAO sometimes double speaks, but FAO has insisted that it's not for lack of food that people suffer hunger. It's for lack of distribution, right? There is enough food in the world, but there's so much that goes to waste because it is not distributed to those who need. Meaning, we do not really need to put the land to greater production of food for us to feed the world. We only need to make sustainable use of what we produce. And sustainability goes from production to consumption. So it's not just about distributing what we have produced, but it's also about how we produce it. Most of the diseases that we are experiencing today is because of what we consume. And it's because of how that food that we consume is produced.
So and you really do sketch. I think that it's a brilliant false dichotomy that we almost get presented, right? That it's about this capacity or this production issue, whereas, as you mentioned, it's really a distribution issue, which then again, when you go into the dynamics behind distribution, you get into justice elements as well, right? Why is it the case that there is so much, to be received and consumed here where we live, where I live, where all of us here in this room live, and in other places it isn't? Then we get back to some of the root causes of issues that have been mentioned before: colonialism, capitalism in the way it works. And I think you touch upon something else which is so vital, which is what you mentioned specifically about when you said valuing the land. I think in the system that we live in currently, right, we value financial value, so to say. So the creation of financial capital, if there's production and if we can sell it. But the entire economic systems, they're not accustomed to valuing the creation of social capital, of natural capital, ecological capital. I mean, it's not in our accounting systems. We don't pay for the climate costs that we incur, for the social costs that we incur, which, enables us to stay in a system in which we're just, in Dutch we say a chicken without a head, but like without thinking too much about it, we just race into this rabbit hole of solely focusing on financial creation. So thank you so much for shedding light on that. And I think, Kathy, you did not know this, but you're giving me the perfect bridge to almost go into the next segment, because for now we've been discussing a lot what the gender faces were of the climate crisis. And I think we've done that very extensively. Sometimes we tiptoed a little bit into those feminist solutions, which is what the next segment really is about. So what can we do about it? I mean, we've heard some brief little things. We talked about representation a little bit, the power of unity. I mean, Kathy coming in with the way in which we value stuff in our economy. Do we just value it for the financial, contribution that it makes, or can we actually shift to a system where we value ecological, benefits to society, natural social benefits? But before we do, one more chance. Feels like a fun fair where, you go into the fun fair attraction and they're like, last chance for everyone to ask a final question. Is there any question to one of our speakers, specifically about the gender faces of the climate crisis? I see somebody here. Do you have, there's a hand over there. I will bring the microphone to you.
Hi.
You were just mentioning that in the... Is that better? Yeah. Oh, yeah, there you go. You were just mentioning that in Holland, especially in the global north or west, that families have more issues with paying higher energy prices. And then you quickly went to the fact that that is then, by definition, gendered. But I was just curious that in what sense is then the paying of higher energy prices specifically gendered? Because just before that, I thought you said that the 10% margin that uses the most energy is the upper class 10%, which then should be gendered more towards males. And then, so I don't really get where that diversion.
That is indeed there. I think there's a gender aspect to all the use at the level. If we look at the biggest users that produce the most CO2, then you see that is caused by mobility. So that's air flights, that is bigger cars, that is bigger houses. That's a group that can actually afford to use a lot. And this is a group. There are more, and I think that's an added word to the discussion that we just had about ecofeminism. There's another side of this coin, and that is called petromasculinity. We also add a lot of status towards using a lot of energy. So we fly, we take our status, we eat a lot of meat, that enhances our status. We drive big cars, that enhances our status. So the biggest users are often more often male than female. But this is the group that can actually afford it. If you then see that the energy in the rising energy prices where we are now, then there are groups also in the global north that have difficulties affording it. And in that group, women are overrepresented. And that has to do with the fact that we tend to look very gender blind towards the solutions of energy poverty and the rising energy prices. But we forgot to look with a different lens to what people actually need, because there are people, and especially households that consist of a family with a single mother, where people earn less money but still have to pay the energy for more people than if you would be a single man. So there's the gender phase of that part of the crisis. So it's everywhere, but it has a different angle.
Yeah,
really.
No, I get it. Yeah, it's the socio-economic inequality that women disproportionately more experience in that sense. Does that answer your question as well? Okay, thank you. Thank you also so much for posing it. Any other questions? Also, when I don't ask, just raise your hands and I will get the microphone to you. And Anouk, thank you so much for shedding light into that. Now, for this next bit, I would like to delve a little bit more into feminist solutions, because I think somebody said it at the very beginning, right? I mean, yes, women are disproportionately more affected by the effects of the climate crisis, and we started off with naming very concrete examples about it. And at the same time, I think none of us here in this room, but I think it also wouldn't be beneficial to solely see women as victims to the crisis. There's so much solution that lies in, putting a gender lens on the way in which we create our policy. That's what you're doing, Gersom, or what you're trying to do, and what you're continuing to do. So really focusing on these feminist solutions is what I want to do for this next segment. And maybe, Gabriella, if you are still with us, I would very much like to start with you, because I think I always love it when we just make it as concrete as possible. So I was curious if you have some examples of women-led initiatives that you think are very important, but then specifically, if you could also perhaps name some of the bottlenecks that they're dealing with, because I think that's important to shed light on, to then maybe discuss with each other, well, if we can take those bottlenecks away, how can we make sure that they can actually scale up these initiatives, because that's what we need in essence. So, Gabriella, if you're there, I'd be super curious to hear more from you. Oh, okay, wow. What a cliffhanger. Nonetheless, I still do think that wasn't a formidable question I just posed. So I'm not going to let a good question go to waste. Maybe, Anouk, if I can look at you, because obviously, I mean, every one of you and people in the room here as well, I think we can name a lot of initiatives amongst each other. But I think it helps to make it concrete. So maybe if it's not a concrete initiative, then maybe just from your side, like, what do you think a feminist approach would look like to tackle the climate crisis very concretely?
I think we're in a situation where we need all hands on deck on all levels. We need a lot of tech innovation, but we also need a lot of social innovations. And if we see who's actually represented in the energy sector, and I look at the climate crisis, but also because of the energy sector is a cause, but also a solution in it. Women are in the Netherlands 15% of the energy sector. We're in the Netherlands, right? 15% of the energy sector is female, and we're short of hands. They're like, I think this week in the papers we were 51,000 people short to actually
force the transition.
And sometimes it's 100,000 or 300,000. We're short of hands, but at the same time, women are running away from the sector. So which really happens. It's not that these women all die. All the skilled and the technically skilled women, they leave the sector. So what we need to do is actually embrace the fact that we need all hands on deck, male, female, and everybody else, and focus on the culture of the sector to get actually these people on board. Yeah.
Hey, and you wanted to respond? No, please go ahead.
If I may respond to this question as well, because I think a feminist perspective, to me, it's really transformative perspective on the climate crisis. So it's maybe not about solutions like electrical cars that are within the same discourse, but are really shifting the discourse. And so it's not only about inclusion, but it's really about redefining who are in the driving seat, I think, when designing solutions. So I think that's a very different perspective. And that's not easy, especially not for government. I think that's very much rooted in in society, perhaps in the current system. But on the other hand, it is what needs to be done to address the climate crisis. And that's also why we, I think, need a foreign feminist policy to even tackle the climate crisis, although it's not adopted just for climate purposes, but I think it's especially useful for addressing climate.
Yeah, and thank you also for adding that, because I think it might be what you said, we need technical innovation and social innovation at the same time. And then I like what you say, indeed, because there isn't a techno fix for everything. And sometimes it's also about changing the way in which we're used to, living our lives, and how do we get people indeed in decision-making positions that are, courageous enough and show enough leadership to actually pave that way forward. I was curious from your side, Anouk, because I think what you just said is striking. 15% of women represented in the sector. At the same time, I was also wanted to ask you, do you, because I know that with your organization, you also focus on getting more women in decision-making positions, specifically within the energy sector, to enable that transition. Do you make a distinction between women board or female board leaders that are more transformative in that sense? Because of course, yes, there is definitely an old boys network within, the big corporates that we have, not just in the Netherlands, but worldwide. At the same time, that sort of old boys mentality, sometimes I also feel like not every, even not all female board members, would be free from that, as much as male board members are also not free from it. So do you select on transform?
That's a very interesting question. So if we put 100% women in the board of the big oil companies, are we going to produce less oil? Probably not, because as long as the shareholders are still demanding for more oil tomorrow. By the way, shareholders are generally male. And located in the global north. But I think it's not necessarily that women are better. There are a lot of, but I think women bring a different perspective. And if we talk about shared leadership, what we do see is that a lot of what we define as female leadership, that's not necessarily somebody wearing a dress. That is actually often advocating the common goal, so a bigger goal, a longer term goal. And care is definitely a bigger part of the story then. So I don't necessarily think that putting a woman somewhere is necessarily better, and one woman doesn't help at all, because when she's gone, we're back at square one. What I do think is that a lot of when we discuss with boards in the energy sector, they're not even aware of the fact that they only consist of copies of themselves. So I think starting to
Do you believe that when they say it? Also, by the way, I totally get that point. But I think there are a lot of, by the way, transformative women that aren't in those board positions because there is a power dynamic of, you know, an old boys network that is gatekeeping it. So I think, of course, not every person for that matter is as transformative as the other, but there's this whole legion of transformative women, which I think if they'd be in those board positions, my God, we could be a lot further than we are today. But going back to that, do you believe it? Because I also hear it so often, and I at this point, I don't believe it anymore. That people aren't aware that they are looking at a mirror of themselves in the board. At least they must have heard it on the outside somewhere.
It's very convenient.
It is convenient not to believe it,
so
right?
I do understand that people that have another 10 years to spend in that job look for their buddies. Look at what happened with Bob Koekstra last year. I mean, he picked a buddy over somebody who was picked by his department. Because the click was just better. And of course, it is much more fun to be with 6 copies of yourself around the table. And if 6 of me and maybe 6 of you is absolutely brilliant, but we're not going to really look wider than
no, it's going to be crazy.
So if we're tackling global issues and if we need innovation, and not only tech innovation, but also for tech innovation, you need different perspectives. We need to embrace the fact that different perspectives accelerate innovation. And I don't necessarily think we get there because I don't think people are aware of the urgency.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. Thank you also for sharing light on that. I think it's very much needed. So thank you also for putting in the effort, not just here at the table, but outside of it as well. In the meantime, if Gabriella is back, please give us a sign. She is back. Gabriella, we have missed you. You were gone for a little bit.
Sorry.
No, don't worry about it at all. I was just before I actually wanted to hear from you because we really want to focus on like what are feminist solutions. If you could name some women-led initiatives that are very inspiring to you, and I specifically mentioned before, can you also tell us what some of the main obstacles are for them that they're experiencing that prevents them to scale up? Because I think those might be very important to mention and talk about how we can overcome them.
I love this question. I know maybe too many because most environmental initiatives in Colombia, maybe in Latin America too, are led by women, maybe unintentionally, but like for example, today I'm here in the conference, so the regional conference of youth on climate change, in Latin America. And at the beginning of the assembly, we looked at everybody in the audience, and like 95% of the people that signed up were women and girls. And this was not intentional. This was just a coincidence, I guess. But to me, most initiatives that I see that are environmental, that or community based, they are led by women. So one movement that was really big here in Colombia was a movement started by our now vice president, Francia Marquez. And she is the first Black vice president, woman Black vice president in Colombia. And she has been an environmental activist since she was a teenager, resisting mining and paramilitary conflicts in the Pacific of Colombia, the South Pacific of Colombia, Cauca. And she started a movement led by women, composed of women, where 80 women marched from the river that was being contaminated by illegal mining done by paramilitary agencies. And she marched with these women all the way to Bogota, to the capital, to protest not only the contamination and ecocide that was being seen in the river, but the social issues that were stemming from the presence of paramilitary agents, conflict, and how this was disproportionately affecting women and affecting mothers, because they were the first ones to have a relationship with the river. So they were the first also to notice the effects on their bodies. They had infections. Their children maybe had also health effects. And this to me is a really inspiring movement because it became so big that it became a nationwide campaign by Francia Marquez that was called Ubuntu, I am because we are. And this is a word that has African origin, and Afro-Colombian communities use this word to unite social and environmental movements. And these social environmental movements, they are led by women. And so it became so big that she was the second most voted person in the last election. And she accepted to be the vice president because she didn't want to divide the more progressive left-wing movement. And she's now the vice president. Maybe I have some differences with some of the things that are going on in these governments, but this was historical. And absolutely. It was really, it was of great significance to have an environmentalist who combines feminist issues, environmental issues,
being
social
placed
issues.
At that level, absolutely. Hey, and Gabriella, specifically when we talk about initiatives like these, I mean, this is a success story, right? But there are also other stories of initiatives that, you know, unnecessarily get blocked or come across a hurdle or an obstacle that they can't overcome, and that, you know, we could all, from each and every one of our roles, whether it's governmental or an organization or an NGO role, you know, join in efforts to overcome these obstacles. Do you have any examples of common obstacles for women-led initiatives that we should be talking about that you'd like to share?
Yes, maybe I will try to be structured in my answer. So, first, one of the issues is that when becoming politically active, so joining Junta de Acción Comunal, so joining a local government or a decision-making association, etc., women face threats maybe from outside, but also from inside their communities. So sometimes maybe their husbands or the men in the community don't like them doing work that is not care work. And so if they do join collectives or cooperatives or associations, then they are relegated to the secretary role or the one who does the food. This is not a bad role, but it is considered inferior in our world, right? Because it is feminine, so it is seen as inferior. It's not. And this is one of the things. So the difficulty of becoming politically active from maybe resistance from their families or the community.
Definitely is.
And
the backlash.
Well, and also because to become politically active, you have to take on a third burden that is an environmental burden. So the first one is a care work, and the second one is economic work, you know, other job, your income, and then you also have the burden of saving the world, you know, the planet or the water or the
true. Minor thing, just mentioning it in between there. It's a side hustle, saving the world. Yeah, but definitely. And thanks for shedding light on that as well. Like the sort of internal dynamic that prevents women from getting the positions that they get. We have a question here in the audience. We'll get to you in a bit. But before we do, I actually wanted to turn to you, Gerson, because Gabriella, she mentions some of the obstacles. Are these obstacles that are, common to you to hear in the work that you do? Because you focus, of course, a lot also in cooperation on probably what are obstacles and how do we overcome them in our policy side as well. So do you recognize some of these?
I think yes, well, this was only one.
Sorry, Gabriella, I am so sorry. I said there's a Gerson here at the table, but I did want to let him respond to some of the things you just mentioned. So if there's anything you'd like to come into in a bit, then please do. But Gerson?
Sorry.
No worries. No, that's all okay.
No, thank you, Gabriella, also for mentioning these obstacles. I think awareness is just the first step, of course, of addressing these obstacles. So but it's a very important one. So I think yes, I think also maybe from my perspective, sitting here in The Hague, it might be difficult to be aware of all the different obstacles that the people that we are targeting with our international cooperation are facing, that women on the ground are facing. So I think therefore it's also so important to work together with them and to have that, to make them a very important part of our programs, so that their voices are amplified and that we make sure that we're actually reaching the people that we want to reach the most vulnerable people, reach the marginalized groups. because otherwise we would not achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So we can only achieve them together. So I think that's an important part. I think one other element maybe Gabriela mentioned earlier on, it was also about representation, and I think she also mentioned COP, for instance, and not sure whether you want to go there later, but that's also very important. I think as the Netherlands, I'm part of our COP delegation, but I think last year was still less than 40% women represented at COP, and of course there's also still difference perhaps in the power they may be able to maybe able to wield at COP. So I think that's also important that we speak up as the Netherlands, that we lead by example. I think in our delegation that there is a good balance, and that we raise awareness, and also I think that what we also try to do is create a community with other governments that are also have a feminist foreign policy, for instance. And I think one example of that is what during the United Nations General Assembly, which is like the big gathering of all countries in the world, happens once a year.
September,
just a couple of weeks ago, I think the Netherlands, together with 18 other governments that have a feminist foreign policy, and many from Latin America actually,
joined forces.
We joined forces with a political declaration, and you might say that that's still only on paper. And
just words.
I agree with that, but it is an important step to at least raise it also at a political level.
I can imagine. And you mentioned COP. I mean, COP, well, the UN General Assembly was just some time ago, but COP is also not too far away in the future. The end of November it will start. Are you specifically already also working on that representation element of female voices at COP specifically? Or what does that look like very concretely?
I think there are two ways of doing that. We have a delegation of negotiators, and I think we have not as the only country, of course, but there are relatively few countries that have that balanced representation. So that's also something that we want to continue. And then I think through our partnerships, including others with ActionAid, but also with many other women groups and partners from the South, also I think we are also helping people to attend COP and to be represented there and join forces in side events. For instance, during last COP, our Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, she also attended the high-level events on gender and raising awareness for that. So I think that's an important one. And then there is also the part on the negotiations on gender specifically as well. So there is a gender action plan also at the climate summits, and it's also very much about capacity building, providing support.
Gender action plan. Maybe can you give us like a glimpse, a scoop of what will be in there, just to get an idea?
Yeah, there is an existing gender action plan, and actually that's going to be reviewed, not this COP but next COP only, and there's supposed to be a new one, so we can already think on how to strengthen that.
But some point
I think one of the elements, it's about mainstreaming gender within government policies. It's about integrating gender within budgets, so not only in international cooperation but in national budgets, making sure indeed that, for instance, in the energy budget, that there's no the women are not overrepresented in energy poverty, for instance.
And for example, that we move from those 18 countries that you work together with, which is great, to an even bigger portion and group of member states.
Of course, that is the main part of it. At the other hand, that's also where the challenge lies, because at COP we are with all the countries in the world, and you may be very aware that not everyone has the same ambitions regarding gender equality, etc. So sometimes the conclusions we reach are not that ambitious. So I would say it's important as an international stage platform to amplify voices, to be inclusive, but even more important, it's more the action on the ground.
And also by being critical ourselves as well, I think that helps a lot with credibility. You mentioned in the Netherlands, we're just 15% of women represented in the energy sector. Well, if we can up our own stats and if we can do the work there, then leading by example, I think also helps a lot. But thank you so much also for shedding light on that. I think that's definitely. Please add, and in the meantime, there's a question from the audience. Just if you briefly would like to add that.
Sure.
Is it? Yeah. You had a question.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to what Gabriela said briefly, because Gabriela, you mentioned, I think you mentioned two things that seem somewhat contradictory. On the one hand, that when you go, for example, this climate conference and environmental spaces, it's majority women. And on the other hand, I think very much in the beginning, you also mentioned how the environmental movement or climate movements are not safe spaces for women still. And also what you mentioned earlier about this, the sort of triple burden, but also the extra care work. I was wondering if you could maybe say a bit more of like that contradiction, but also how you see, for example, the care burden in environmental movements. And from my personal experience, I also recognize that a lot of climate movements, women do more of the work, but when you see who are the people in front of the cameras, it's more often men. So also there you get this gender inequality.
Yeah, very good question. If you will, Gabriela, that would be great if you could add to it. If she's with us. Gabriela, are you there? Oh, she is.
Yes, but it got cut in the part of the question. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, for sure. I think you mentioned the contradiction on the one hand that there are a lot of women that you mentioned, women and girls at these climate conferences, for example. But at the same time, it's also not a safe space for them. And specifically, how do we then make sure that very often when we see climate movements that a lot of the work is being done by women, and we see then that they are present, but then when we see who is seated at the table during the critical decision-making moment, usually it's a man, or when we see who's in front of the camera, telling the story and sort of like taking the moment and the stage, it's usually very male-dominated. So how do we move around that was the question.
I love this question. I love all of these. So this is very true. Usually everything what is behind the curtains is done by women, and then usually who takes the credit is a man. Maybe not from bad intention. Maybe it has to do more with socialization, with teaching boys confidence and girls to be more insecure, things like that. We have experienced this because our movement, Pacto por el Clima, it is like 95% women. And then who they call for the media is always the men in the movement. Or we see a lot of what we call manels, which are panels, but only with men, in terms of environmental or climate or energy related fields.
Yeah.
And we have started we decided that this is, even though it seems superficial, this is not okay. And our organization is pioneering, a way to criticize or change these manuals.
Yeah.
So we created this document that is like a map of all of the women experts in climate, in energy, in environment, in community-led solutions. And whenever we are invited or we see a manual, we will put it and we alert the people that it's a manual, and then we give them all the alternatives that they can have in terms of invitees. We have also developed a gender protocol that is not gender, but a discrimination and violence prevention in all types of ways. So whether it's culture, race, ethnicity, or social types of discrimination. And we have shared it with all of the organizations that surround us. But this is not enough because oftentimes when you go to spaces like COP or government spaces.
Yeah. Oh, you got cut off right there, Gabriela. Oh.
You are a girl. There are these tiny things. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Now it's better?
Yeah. There are these tiny things?
Oh, okay. There are these, maybe, like we call it micromachismos, which is like microaggressions. But so things like calling grown women girls in Colombia. Like, you are a grown diplomat, and they will refer to you as like, the girl that does that.
Oh, you're scratching the right part of my brain. I don't know how often I have been okay. I'm young. I'm 23. But then you have these men, and they're like, "Yeah, girl, it's." Or in Dutch we say meisje, so like so it means little girl in a way, in a very like. But I hear what you say. It's sort of a power play, right? To it's like all these what you said, these micro sort of aggressions that if you accumulate them all, they show you the clear picture of why we're in the system that we're in, because we're actively trying to keep voices small, and we're actively trying to keep voices under the table, so to say. As you were speaking, Gabriella, I also saw here on my left side that Anouk, I think something that you said really resonated with her, because you, I saw you nodding, Anouk.
It triggered something. It's the same. It's maybe what you described is that a lot of social movement and climate movements are actually led by women and girls, which is there's a very strong analog now happening in locally here in the Netherlands, and these are the energy corporations. These are founded by often by women, by local groups, really grassroots organizations. But as soon as there are board positions to be appointed, or presidents to be appointed, or the state is involved, what happens? Men take over. So, and then the whole dynamics change. I think this is everywhere. And to change that, if we now talk to the organizations, they're like, we see it happening, but we have no idea where to start stopping this. Because these women, they don't really care about the status. That's one. On the other hand, they don't have the time to be in the weekly meetings and to discuss the whatevers. So
nonsense.
As soon as there's something that fits in the system, it will be eaten by the system.
And it's also what Gabriella mentioned. It's virtue, it's socialization. At the same time, earlier we talked about female politicians and the backlash that you get, and the misogyny that is present in those systems. So if you do venture out there, you're met with this enormous wave of it's just vile, it's just ugly the way you're treated, and that is also not very encouraging for the people that do fight their way and maybe find some loophole through all these hurdles to still get in those positions. I want to go back to Kathy, because when we talk about these solutions, and Gabriella, thank you for sharing it, and also thank you for adding Anouk. I also love the idea of like just showcasing a book with a lot of names and being like, well, if you can't find somebody, that's not a valid argument anymore. It's 2023 now. Look through my list. But Kathy, I think you've been tapping into something that is, I think, a very unique sort of like element of the solution as well. I mean, you talked about the agroecology initiatives, and I'd like to hear a little bit more of those. Would you call agroecology also a feminist solution, or how do you see potential in there to bring some feminist solutions to the table?
Absolutely, it is. It is in very many ways. Because as we mentioned right at the beginning, I think we are in agreement that women take a great role in taking care of nature as caregivers, not just of the people in their families, but also of the nature within which they live. And agroecology is one agricultural practice that is about taking care of the ecosystem so that it can take care of you. That's basically what it is. We have seen, for example, in Africa that many women who are smallholder farmers save their seeds, indigenous seeds, for planting and for replowing, for regeneration, season after season. But unfortunately, right now, and I think this is one of the bottlenecks that then we would be talking about, we are seeing many regional communities. Remember that Africa is parceled up into regional communities that then make up the African Union. Regional communities developing policies to outlaw saving of seeds, saving of indigenous seeds, so that farmers can depend on seeds from the market, be they GMOs or hybrids. The problem with that, of course, is that then you have to cough out money for you to get the seeds, for you to be able to plant the crop and be able to feed your family. How many women will have the liquid money to buy the seeds from the market, while they could just exchange seeds across the fence with their neighbors, right? Now, it's very difficult. I think the way the Kenyan market, not Kenyan, but African market is made up is that there's more trading, barter trading, than there is commercial trading, exchange of money. There's more exchanging of goods. You have a banana, I have this, and we'll exchange more than there is someone going into the market to buy the banana.
Right.
So outlawing exchange and saving of indigenous seeds is one of the reasons why the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services is saying that most indigenous local seeds, local breeds of plants and animals are dying, they're disappearing because of these policies that are outlawing saving of these seeds. But agroecology is one practice that helps farmers not only preserve those seeds, whether they're animal or plant seeds, that are well adapted to an ecosystem, to be able to multiply them and to be able to support their families or to support the communities within that locality. Also remember that there's a lot that goes on as relating the food. You know, there's this whole practice of there's a whole food system that operates within each locality, and there are people are adapted to the food that they produce.
Right.
But the moment new foods are introduced, then they're not able to even to save those seeds which are exotic to them.
Absolutely,
right?
And that also shows that we're sort of not valuing the sort of like almost rural knowledge that is present enough, which is contributing to that. So maybe to make the question more broadly as well, Kathy, if I would ask you, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you see when it comes to bringing feminist solutions to the table, and how do you think we should overcome those? Maybe just very briefly, if you could.
Well, I think some already have been mentioned. Of course, we have to tackle patriarchy and neoliberal economic systems. That is a very, very big question, and it's a fight for many of us, so I will not belabor on that. But this is also where now we have to start protecting nature defenders. We have to defend the nature defenders. We have to protect human rights defenders and environmental defenders. But other bottlenecks that we see is, of course, doing away with the rhetoric. Right? There's a lot of rhetoric. If you look at what is coming out of COP about climate financing and whether that money is actually put on the table for redistribution and where that money goes, even when it is redistributed to the most vulnerable communities, does it get to the women? Absolutely not. And most of the times, let me tell you, for example, the reason why women do not benefit from climate finances, even when they suffer loss from climate calamities, is that what I've found in my sector, at least in the area that I've worked in, is that because most women do not have security of tenure to the land and the natural resources they depend on, even when there is loss and damage within those systems that they are in, they do not benefit from compensation or for loss and damage because they are not recognized as owners. They don't have security of tenure. So there's a lot of rhetoric that we will put money in this pot, but who does it benefit? It still goes back to the same people who are the cause of the problems that we are encountering.
Right.
The other obstacle, of course, we have already mentioned previously, is how little we value ecosystem services of nature.
Maybe taking your points, Kathy, and maybe bringing them to you, Gerson, because a couple of things are mentioned. COP is upcoming. You are in preparation. You mentioned climate financing, protecting nature protectors. Well, some of the other things that have been named. You also mentioned rebuilding our economy, which I think is so vital and crucial. Also a big thing that needs to happen, but also big in the exercise. But how is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? How does the upcoming period look like with regards to trying to take these obstacles and overcome them? How can you help? Is maybe like my question from like a policy perspective. What is it that you can do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think maybe on two sides, there is maybe more the policy, the diplomatic side, and there is more the on-the-ground action, which is in the end most important, of course. I think also as the ministry, we are providing finance for environmental defenders. We're providing safe houses, etc. So I think that's one priority. Then I think there are the dedicated funds for women and girls, for all type of minorities. Maybe, of course, it's also very important to integrate these gender elements in our climate programs, in all those type of programs. Maybe more on the policy side. Looking at COP, I think there are a lot of discussions taking place on climate finance, for instance, and I heard that next session will also be about that. So yeah, there is.
Yeah, it is indeed, by the way. So if you haven't registered yet and you want to hear more about that, teasing you in. Yeah.
So, but maybe one other point I might want to make that we could also perhaps help is in being being self-reflective. Also, I mean, I try to perhaps to paint a picture of our feminist foreign policy, things that we try to improve,
right,
that we have decided to improve. So there is that high ambition, but at the same, I think also part of that is also looking at what we're not doing right. So I think this policy has only been in place for the last 1.5 years, and it's not to say that before there was no awareness at all, but we have to look at our policies from the past and how to improve them. We have to look at how they impact women, how they impact different genders, and improve that. And also, I think, indeed, what you mentioned before, you have to lead by example. And I think there also, the ministry where I'm working at, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, last year there was a report that there is also institutional racism at our institution. So I think that's very important also to address those inequalities that have brought to the forefront. And there, I think also that the feminist perspective is important.
Absolutely. I think, thank you for raising that point as well, because I think it's at the core of progress in any way that we need to be self-reflective. And I think it's only incredible when we do that. There is a question in the back which I want to go to in a bit, but before we do, Gersom, if you mentioned that, I can't help but also want to hear more about when you talk about like looking back on some of the things that, you know, in the past could have been better, but also looking forward. You know, you have the feminist foreign policy right now. You're working on it. It's also a work in progress. What are some things that you're not doing right now that you hope that you could potentially take up with regards to your feminist foreign policy, feminist climate policy, perhaps, that you're not doing yet?
Yeah, that's a very good question, of course. I think it's maybe not about not doing things at all, but doing them much more.
Okay.
And I think still it is very easy to design priorities for programming from our political priorities from our capital. While we do acknowledge that actually to achieve our results, we need to take into account the perspective of those that we're working with and targeting also. So I think that will continue to be a challenge, I think. So I would also very much want to invite, I think, all groups from the South, women groups, etc., to continue to hold the Netherlands, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, accountable, I think, in what we're doing. I think transparency is important, holding accountable in order to make sure that we move in the right direction.
You know, I like that too.
And maybe in terms of COP representation, I think at this point we don't have a policy that stipulates that we should have a gender balance in our delegation, for instance. So luckily that's the case, but I think that's also we could take further steps to institutionalize that.
I like that.
Not only on paper but also the logic behind it to make sure we're more effective and we're more diverse.
Yeah, absolutely, because then it's not just dependent on the goodwill of the people in those positions to make sure that they create a group or a delegation that is representative, but then it's also formally ingrained, and you can rely on that even if the person in charge isn't as good-willed as the people right now might be. I like that one. It's also very concrete. It's something that I think is very feasible to work towards on the short term. No pressure, Gersom, but I'm going to the question in the back there. Thank you so much for sharing as well. Over here, thank you. Yes, I'll hold the mic for you, so no worries. But you can stand, actually. It might be nice, then the rest can see you.
I'm very short anyway. Thank you so much. Actually, Ursula, the things that you were mentioning, couple of words tickled my brain, like self-reflection and awareness. And this is more of a question to all of you, how to deal with denial. Because I think for most of the corporations as well, they also believe that they are doing their utmost best. So how can we deal with that? How can we deal with that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Do you want to pose it to somebody in specific, to Gersom? I heard you mentioning his name, but anyone can take it. Gersom, do you want to add, or otherwise I see Gabriella is also on the screen. I know that that's not by your own doing, Gabriella, but it might be an omen from above. Gersom, would you like to start, or?
No, we're happy for Gabriella or Anouk to start.
Yeah, or Kathy, if you want.
Kathy, of course.
Gabriella, do you want to start? How do we deal with denial was the question.
Yes, how do we deal with like climate denial, or in general denial that the feminist issues are necessary in climate?
I think this question specifically was with regards to some corporations, for example, that truly believe that they're on the right path and that they're accelerating enough. But then when we look at the statistics, or for the same fact, perhaps governments, I mean, no government is in line with 1.5 degrees of global warming. But then at the same time, it's what we preach, it's what we praise about ourselves. So the denial with regards to the commitments that we should be living up to.
This is great. This is a great question. I don't know. I can't see who asked it.
I love it. I love that you're like the nicest guest to have. Like every question is a question you love. So it's a gift to me. So thank you so much, and also to the one who posed it. But please go ahead.
Yes, this I have seen a lot. Everybody believes that they have the best intentions.
Yeah.
And here I want to say with what you were previously mentioning about the risks and the dangers of human rights and land defenders and environmentalists. And in Colombia, it is the #1 most dangerous country in the world to be a human rights or land defender or environmentalist. This is according to the Global Witness reports. And I didn't want to the conference without mentioning that, because this is something, this is my Escazú agreement piece. We have working towards an agreement that integrates human rights and land defense and protects land defenders since 4 years ago. And when we face the companies that are stopping this accord, that are literally saying no to an accord that seeks to protect land defenders, and when we talk to them, they say, well, are you against the economy? Are you against jobs being created? We are doing our best. We want what is best for the country, right? So I completely understand about this denial, that everybody thinks that they're doing the best that they can with what they've got and with the ideas that they have grown up with and that have developed, right? And so how to deal with denial, I think, is a lot about narratives and about changing the framework of what people usually think of things as. So narratives are incredibly powerful. And the most moving and powerful narratives have come from the youth movement that started very actively in 2018. But the environmental movement in Latin America, for example, has been years and years. And I think the narratives that connect and people who live one reality and think of things as
it's so vital, right? It's really about, as I hear you say as well, and I fully agree. I think so many youth activists, and I think you're undoubtedly one of them. It's really about the role that I think that we as activists, but also journalists and media have to play in, taking some of the work that is being done and then really looking, well, does it add up? And if it doesn't, then let's be vocal about it and let's make sure that people hear it.
Add one more thing?
Yeah, please go ahead. I see that you wanted to add. Just briefly, if you can.
We're all talking about how a representation matters in the COP, right? Mm-hmm. It's not only about that women are 50% and men are 50%. It's about who is there that is representing the interests of women. And it doesn't matter if it's 50-50, if 80% of them are from the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
So
yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah. It's the same thing that we talked about before about representation being super valuable in itself, but then at the same time, when you look at a specific goal that you're targeting, it's also about the transformativeness of people, which there is enough because Gabriella's got lists of them, and you undoubtedly as well. Before we go to you, I saw that there was a hand there, there's a hand there, and there's a hand there, and we have.
Add something as an answer to your question, or no?
Yeah, perhaps one of the questions.
Yeah, because the denial, and I think the denial, dealing with the denial. Yeah. Is that, can I still?
No, sorry. Actually, no, sorry. I thought to one of the new questions.
A new question.
Sorry, because we're a little short on time, and I do want to get to a bit more.
Yeah, so sorry. No, kind of ties into the previous question, but for Gerson maybe, because you mentioned that a big part of the work that you do is mainstreaming gender into a lot of projects or policy. Yeah. And I wonder, because I feel like this kind of has two sides. I feel like sometimes it can also be dangerous that I feel like in the development sector, gender is so mainstream sometimes that it becomes kind of an empty term, that it's like thrown around in like every project.
How do we make sure that it doesn't become a buzzword, basically?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a very, very good question, a very honest. It is important, I think, that gender is not just mainstreamed, so that there's also dedicated budget, that there's dedicated capacity for gender. I think in the Netherlands that is the case. We have a gender task force, but we also have a department that's focusing on social inclusion and gender, women's rights, sexual health, reproduction, etc. So that is important, but then in addition, I think it needs to be integrated in other elements and not just as a tick-the-box exercise. And I think in the past it has been, but by including a gender analysis up front, I think it's hard not to integrate those conclusions into the project design, etc. By increasing the representation. So I think it's going better, but still you will face questions of where to focus on more. And so it's not perfect.
No, but thank you. And I think you mentioned representation. That definitely is an important one, because it's the people that are affected by the issues that I think can make sure that the accountability is there, right? To make sure that it actually is meaningful inclusion of a gender perspective or a representative, allocation of people. We have a question here as well.
Yeah. I was wondering, how do you look at bringing men on board as well in the discussion, and especially because we talk about masculinity, redefining masculinity, and at least I believe there's a lot also in that space still possible.
Anouk, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I think men are people too. Human too. If I talk about SDG 5, that's gender equality. It's very easy to get into a gender, a women, a man, women discussion, but we all have genders, we all identify for genders, whatever gender that is. And it's about equality and having everybody on board. I think that's something that you cannot really be against. Yeah. So taking it to a
It's called right wing, that's against equality.
It's against, yes. So if you pull it from if I talk, because I talk a lot, I'm in this energy sector, I talk a lot with men, I talk a lot with women. Just talking about women's rights is not going to do the trick. We need different perspectives to actually get people with different visions on board.
Right. Okay, thank you. We have a question here as well.
Yeah, actually I have two questions, but I'll try to frame it.
If you can choose one, that would be great. Or combine them, you may combine them.
Yeah, okay. The first question is regarding the delusional part, because I'm also part of the energy sector. I work for Vattenfall, so renewable energy. So I was quite shocked when you mentioned the numbers regarding women. So I'm wondering, how can organizations, because I believe that my organization are doing a lot to bring in women. We have like our CEO who is a woman. In my team, we have probably 1 out of 7, so meaning 1 male and 7 women. It's like in a small team, because for the wind part, I'm thinking, how can organizations who at least think that they are, forward in when it comes to equality, how can they collaborate with companies that are not really doing a lot space?
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry. But that I think is a very vital question. I think the most logical person I think is Anouk to perhaps answer it, because indeed, how do you get those companies on board that are way off, perhaps even further and below the average of 15% that you mentioned?
I think that's the power of a coalition of the willing. So getting companies on board that don't really care is not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
So finding the companies that do really makes you stronger together. And there are very different incentives for companies to have gender balance. That could be more profits, that could be more innovation, but that could also be the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to find each other.
Yeah, I like that. It does refer back to the power of unity that Kathy mentioned. And if she is still there, Kathy, I was curious, perhaps if you could ever so briefly, a lot of things have been mentioned so far. We've been talking about action points. Do you have any final call to action to the people here live in Amsterdam with us, and also to all the people joining online on how we can move forward from here?
Now, I think we've done very well, but we are not going to find progress. We are not going to make any steps forward if we do not address the structural challenges that women face in all sectors of life.
Yeah.
We have to realize that climate crisis and how it affects women is not an isolated situation. It affects women more because they are already structurally disadvantaged, and we have to address that structural barrier as to why they don't participate. It's not enough to say that we will have 50-50 representation at COP. If back home, I'll give you an example very, very quickly. I was working in Nepal. I was supporting the women's movement there, fighting for women's land rights. And the government of Nepal was very supportive and passed a progressive policy in supporting women's land rights. But it happens that the woman who was leading the movement in Nepal at the time, and who was very vocal about women's land rights, was actually being battered. She was experiencing domestic violence at home, and she was actually murdered by her husband. So it was one thing for her to be fighting for women's land rights while not fighting against gender-based violence, for example. So we have to integrate these fights for us to be able to make any progress with the climate question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, it's tragic, the example you mentioned, but it shows. It ever so much shows the urgency of combining those issues together and making sure that we view it from what they then so call an intersectional perspective and approach moving forward. Thank you so much, not just to you, Kathy, to you, Gabriella, Gersom, Anouk, everyone in here in the room with us for all your amazing questions. It was very insightful to hear from you. I think we could go on for longer, but I also want to allow you to get into bed on time tonight. So thank you so much for joining. Now, just before we leave, there are still some spots left for the next sessions of the Feminist Climate Academy. So next week, on the 17th of October, we have the Paying for the Climate Crisis session, which is all about loss and damages. In 3 weeks' time, on the 31st of October, we have our third episode, which is a feminist energy transition that we'll be speaking about. And we close off this series on November 16th with a big debate about climate justice 1 week before the Dutch elections. So make sure to be there, folks. Lastly, all our events are free, and we also would like to keep it this way. So if you want, and if you want to enforce that, you can become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijgen by scanning this QR code right here in the back. And additionally, if you want to help make sure that the Feminist Climate Academy can continue to exist, and ActionAid can keep standing side by side with women worldwide to fight the climate crisis and fight for climate justice and much more, then please consider donating via actionaid.nl. And in that way, we can hopefully join forces much more and continue to do the good work that is very much needed. With that being said, I'll say a good night to you, and I won't say goodbye. I'll say until we meet again at the very next session. Thank you so much.